Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today for this special podcast in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Between the three of us, we were just doing some quick math, and we have over 50 years, like over a half of a century of serving immigrants. And most of those, I would say, are survivors of domestic violence. Most of our work has been concentrated on that. So I want to say just a thank you to each of you, first of all, for doing this work. Especially right now, we know that those who love and serve immigrants and who believe that immigrants make America great, like we do, it's a hard time to be doing what we do. And so I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that we are in Trump 2.0. All of us went through Trump 1.0, and here we are again. And we don't know what the future holds, but I know for sure that my job is easier having the two of you by my side, and you are both fierce advocates for immigrants. And so I'm proud to know you and have you in our firm. And so grateful for the work that we are doing to continue to serve immigrants and to find ways to help them to get settled here in the U.S. So that is going to be our focus today, is talking about the different ways that we help survivors of domestic violence. We're going to be talking about some misconceptions, some myths, and just along the way sharing some stories. The goal is to provide some information, as this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That is a mouthful. We want to be able to share some information and just help people to understand what it is, what it can mean. Many people that I've found over the years would never acknowledge that they were in a domestic violence situation, wouldn't have recognized it as that. And so it's always very important to help share some examples, some stories along the way, so that people can feel more understood and more willing to come forth and talk about what's going on. So we're going to start by talking about VAWA, which I don't know if you guys have heard clients call this, but many clients who don't speak English, they call it WAWA. I don't know where this came from. I would love to know where it comes from, but I hear it all the time. And I've stopped correcting people, honestly, because what does VAWA even mean? Most people just hear that term WAWA and they know it's something related to domestic violence or abuse. And so let's just start there. Let's have a conversation about what is VAWA, who does it help, what are some of the benefits, and some of the ways that this is something that can help immigrants get settled here in the U.S. So, Alice, let's start with you. Do you have any understanding of where the VAWA comes from? I would love to have some light shed on that if you do.
The only thing I could think of is that some languages pronounce a V as a W. So that's the only thing I could think of, is maybe that they're trying to pronounce it, correctly, or they're, English is a second language, but I don't know. Other than that, I have heard that though. So, but yeah.
Yeah, so when a client or a potential client brings this up to you, you already know, then, this is what they're talking about. Do you ever correct them? Do you say no? Do you explain? How do you explain what VAWA is?
So I normally don't correct people, because I try to learn Spanish, and I my pronunciation is off sometimes. So I certainly wouldn't want anyone to feel bad, because it's hard when you're learning a second language. So I don't correct people, but I do use the term VAWA, so they may just pick it up after hearing me use it a couple of times. But VAWA stands for the Violence Against Women Act, which is how it was originally passed in Congress, although it is not limited to just women. That's a really big misconception. I know we've talked about that internally a lot, as immigration practitioners, wanting to make sure that the word gets out there that this is not a form of relief limited to just women.
Right, exactly. And so it came from the legislation that was like also protecting other things within domestic violence as well, right? And remind me, I'm thinking it's like 1990s, early 2000s. Was it somewhere around there?
Yeah, it was definitely back in the 90s. I don't recall exactly when. It was a little bit before I started practicing as an attorney. But it was initially passed to protect people who had been victims of abuse here in the United States.
Right. And so it's important to note that because it's law, this is not just something that Trump could just take away from one day to the next, right? What would have to happen?
Absolutely. No, this is definitely codified in the law. It's been passed. There's been multiple reauthorizations and extensions of the acts over the years. And so now it's expanded to protect more people. There are certainly policies and applications that are impacted in various administrations. But when it comes to the basic eligibility, that is codified in the law. And so that cannot be changed on a whim.
Right. I think this is a really important point that I want to bring up today is that there are so many things changing right now through the Trump administration, changing in immigration law, but there are many things that cannot be changed unless Congress chooses to change it, which we know that like Congress acts very slowly and it's very hard to get things changed through Congress. So VAWA is one of the things that would be very, very difficult to take away or to change, right?
Absolutely agree. Yes.
Yeah. Tami, talk to us. What are some of the eligibility requirements for VAWA?
Yeah, so for VAWA, you have to be married to a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, or you have to be the parent of a US citizen or the child of a US citizen or lawful permanent resident and have experienced some kind of abuse as a result of that relationship.
Right, exactly. What about if the marriage is over or they're separated?
Yeah, so being separated doesn't really count or doesn't make you ineligible. You can still apply if you are separated. If you are divorced, you have to get that application filed before you've been divorced for 2 years.
Right, exactly. And I love that that was actually something that wasn't original. That was changed at some point, if I'm correct. Maybe not.
I'm not sure. It could have been it. Yeah, like Alice said, the whole, I think the last reauthorization was a little bit before my time. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it gets all jumbled in my head sometimes. But so because that can be one of the ways that an abuser chooses to victimize their spouse is by saying, well, you're not going to be able to get this form of relief because I'm going to divorce you. And so now you're no longer going to be eligible. And so I believe that that's why that's given those 2 years to be able to seek that relief, but it can still be challenging, right? Because there's a lot to do to prepare a case, right? Alice, can you walk us through what are some of the things that we do with our clients to make sure that their case is prepared in such a way that it's more likely to get approved?
So, the first thing we do is we really want to have good in-depth conversations with our clients to truly understand the breadth of their experience because a lot of things that are considered abuse, people don't recognize as abuse. Things such as, financial alienation. People don't understand that that is considered a form of abuse. And we want to really meet with our clients and ask some deep, in-depth questions, but that requires a level of uh, comfort that we have to build with them, a level of trust that we have to build in our relationship with them in order for them to open up and feel comfortable sharing those types of personal details. So it really starts with forming a good relationship with our client and letting them know that the questions we ask are for a purpose, letting them know that our goal is to help them, not to re-traumatize them. And so we're very mindful, all of us are very skilled in doing these types of questionnaires and meeting with clients in such a sensitive way because we are very cognizant of the fact that they've been through trauma and we don't want to make that worse by asking these questions. But our case and our representation really focuses on our initial meetings with them and creating a detailed affidavit from them. And that's what's going to be used to really focus our advocacy for their application, whether it's through briefing or cover letters or working with therapists and doctors to find independent support for the abuse and the effects of that abuse on them and the trauma that they've experienced. It's documenting those things and working together in a collaborative way for the purpose of that application being granted.
Yeah, speaking of documentation and evidence, get that question a lot, especially where there's not a police report or not really any physical violence. And so, Tami, can you just explain to us, is a police report required? Is it required that the person have been arrested? If not, then what kinds of evidence can help prove that this person qualifies for VAWA?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one we do get a lot. No, a police report is not required. Obviously, if you have one, it's helpful and we want to see it, but we still want to help you even if you've never reported. So just as Alice was talking about, your statement, the statement from the client is really important for these applications. And that's where good representation will really help you. We are trained to know what kind of questions to ask to make sure that we get the information that is going to be the most helpful for your statement. And so we would work with you to write your statement. We would also help connect you with a mental health person or a psychologist who can help do some kind of like an independent psychological evaluation. I think a lot of times those can be really helpful, especially if there's no police report, because then you do have like an independent third party who is able to kind of see everything and give their professional opinion about what has happened in this relationship and how maybe some of the behaviors that a person might not think is abuse can actually be abuse. And talking with a therapist or a counselor can really help kind of get all of that information to the forefront.
Right, exactly. And some of these cases can be challenging to document. Sometimes the only thing we have is that declaration, and that's why it's even more important to have that well written and well detailed. And we don't just let our clients do that on their own. Like, we have to interview them and walk them through. And it's not that we are looking to find something to get it approved. No, like you're saying, and Alice, you said this too, sometimes we have to dig because people haven't maybe even talked about these things with anyone. It can be very shameful even in some ways to talk about things that have hurt us so deeply. And so we are looking for that information in order to present it, like you said, not to hurt people, not to re-traumatize them, but this is information that the government will require in order to prove that this person is eligible for VAWA. And part of the government's job is to figure out whether or not somebody actually qualifies. That is like their whole job. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is not changes in VAWA, but changes in way that these cases are being reviewed, and much, much stricter scrutiny of, is this an actual case, or is this somebody that maybe was encouraged or coached to make something up just because there's nothing else that they can do. And I hate to say that as an immigration attorney. I don't want to think that there are people out there doing it, but immigration seems to think that there is increased fraud in this area, and that is why they're going to be paying more closer attention to this. So I want to say that, not to spend a lot of time on this point, but to make sure that you are working with a reputable attorney who's not just going to make something up, who's not going to tell you, this is how you win your case, but is actually going to talk with you and work with you and make sure that you do qualify for the application you're filing for. Number one, because if it's not true, there's severe consequences for filing a fraudulent application, and then it's just going to get denied, and then you're going to get put into deportation, and then you're going to be in a much worse situation than you started out with. So Alice, talk us through what are some of the questions that we're going to ask potential clients when they call initially, when they reach out to us. What are some of the questions that they might get asked so that they're ready, so that they're not like taken off guard by these questions that we ask, the types of questions that we ask to see if there might be a VAWA case there?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned, what you did, because those of us that are truly victim advocates that are trying to really work for clients who have legitimately been harmed and abused and trafficked, you know, when we hear these stories of people with false claims, it really takes away the legitimacy of our clients. And so, those of us that are really truly advocating for these cases, we feel very strongly about getting it right. And so some of the questions that we ask are really focusing on the cumulative nature of the relationship. Some people think, oh, well, he never actually hit me, so I don't qualify. But there are other forms of abuse. And while physical abuse is one form of abuse that may qualify you for VAWA, there are other things that we're going to ask about. I mentioned, financial alienation a moment ago. But there's also verbal abuse, emotional abuse, being secluded from your family and your friends, being told what you can and cannot do as far as working and traveling, withholding your immigration documents is a form of alienating someone or controlling their movement and mobility. And so when you have someone who's exercising power and control over another person, those are the types of things that we are looking into. So we're going to ask, who controlled the finances? Did you have a car? Could you come and go whenever you wanted to? How is your relationship with your friends? We're asking these types of questions to figure out what level of freedom and independence did you have in this relationship, and what inhibitors or limitations were there, and who set those boundaries, and are you okay with those boundaries, and so it's really exploring what their relationship was like, because everyone's relationship is different, right? Everybody has different boundaries and different things that work for them. There's also cultural considerations that we take into account, but ultimately, here in the United States, you have the freedom of movement, you have the freedom to come and go, you have the freedom to make your own choices and autonomy over yourself and well-being. And when someone puts limits on you that you do not agree with and inhibits you from exercising those freedoms, that's when, we dig a little deeper and find out, where did that come from, and how did that make you feel? What are the effects of those limitations? Those kind of things.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. That's so helpful. Also, especially for some of our male clients, right? They're very different types of things that they have endured in their relationships. I've talked with clients where their wife like took all their clothes and ripped them up, cut them up, and or made them sleep outside in the car because they got mad. So things that some people, I think in some cultures, that could just be seen as, oh, that's just a toxic relationship. Like, no, that's actually abuse. And maybe that's one of the things that's different about the laws and the resources here in the US, is that in many cultures that might be acceptable, just like maybe a physical form of discipline for children might be acceptable in some cultures, but here in the US, like, that is not acceptable. That is called child abuse. And so that's also another reason why it's so important that we provide this information, and that people share this information, is because many times people come to the US, and the US is like a place of freedom, and like you're saying, a place where we're allowed to do what we want to do. But many people come here still with those limitations and those thoughts of like, well, this is somebody I married, this is a relationship that I need to stay in, and a commitment that I've made, and that's not true. Like, people have freedom, people have choice, and they need to understand that this could be abuse. One thing I wanted to bring up, I think all of us were practicing immigration law before it was legal to marry someone of the same sex. I remember like specifically when that change was made. And so it's important to just point out that just because you're in a same-sex relationship doesn't mean that you're not eligible for VAWA. So I've seen, I don't know if you guys have seen, but the domestic violence, it crosses all relationship types. Tami, have you seen, could you give an example of how you've seen that dynamic play out in a same-sex marriage?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what Alice just explained. Any time that there is one person that has more power and control in that relationship, they can use any means to exhibit that power and control. And so, financial abuse is a big one. Emotional, psychological, just constant criticizing, humiliating, name calling, controlling, isolating, controlling who you're allowed to be around, controlling finances is a big one. I mean, I don't think that it is unique to just people in heterosexual relationships. I think it spans all of the relationships, family dynamics in general.
Exactly. Yeah. People are people, regardless of who you love and what relationship you're in. I found that people are people and we all struggle. And another good point to bring up too is that some people think, well, if you get VAWA, if you apply for VAWA, you have to leave the person that you're with. And I want to point out that that's not a requirement. And I'm glad that that's not a requirement because people change and relationships can improve. And so I would never want to have to tell somebody you have to leave. I want to be able to support them to make that decision if they choose to end that relationship, but it is not a requirement, and so it's important to keep in mind. And I've helped clients where the abuse was years ago, and things turned around. They got some therapy, or maybe there was some substance abuse, and the person is no longer struggling in that area, and so the relationship therefore improved. So I want to move on. We've talked about VAWA. I want to talk about also U visa next. And as we talk through these different options, I'd like to hear from you both, like where are some times where we might recommend more than one option if someone is eligible for it. So the VAWA requires marriage to a U.S. citizen, or a permanent resident, or the child or the parent relationship. So it requires that relationship. But let's talk about U visa. Talk to me about some of the differences between VAWA and the U visa, Alice.
So for a U visa, you don't have to have a relationship to that person at all. A U visa is for someone who has been the victim of certain specified types of crime. And so you don't have to have any type of relationship to a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, such that VAWA requires. A U visa focuses more on the fact that you've been a victim of a crime. And, we mentioned for VAWA, you don't have to have a police report, but for the U visas, you do have to show that there is some underlying crime, and law enforcement has to agree that you have been a victim of a certain type of crime. And they do that by signing a certification and endorsing your application. So there are some big differences, but one of the overlaps is that being a victim of domestic violence can also qualify you for a U visa if there's a police report, if there's an arrest or a prosecution. You may have both options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tami, have you seen somewhere where we've done a VAWA and a U visa, and what situation might that be helpful?
Yeah, so one of the really great things about the U visa is that when you're applying for the U visa, you also have an opportunity to apply for a waiver to basically ask for forgiveness for all of your past immigration violations. And generally speaking, these waivers are very broad. There's not a whole lot that you can do that immigration won't forgive when your U visa is forgiven. And so we have had certain clients who maybe have like a certain type of immigration violation that can't be forgiven through VAWA, but can be forgiven through the U visa. And so in those situations, we might file both of the applications because the VAWA application might help somebody get a work permit sooner, whereas the U visa long-term would be more beneficial in helping them ultimately become a permanent resident.
Yeah, exactly. So also here in Oregon, one thing that we've been able to do, you mentioned the requirement for the police report. Talk to me, Tami, about some of the cases you've seen where we've been able to use just the restraining order where there wasn't actually a police report filed.
Yeah, so part of this process is, so with the certification that law enforcement has to sign is we have to show that you've been helpful or cooperative in either the investigation or the prosecution of a crime. And so if the police report isn't there, if you didn't report, but you did go to the court and ask for a protective order, you were granted a protective order, you had to give testimony in that case about your reason for needing that protective order. And so in those cases, the judge is basically doing the investigation. They're figuring out if the circumstances arose to the fact that you actually need this protective order. And so if the protective order is granted, the judge in those cases can file the certification because they've done the investigation, the prosecution on their end instead of the police getting involved. And so we have been able to get some certification signed that way. I believe we've also been able to get certification signed where if there's been like a violation of a protective order, because then there is a police report sometimes in that instance, and so then we can go to the judge or the police. So protective orders are really important.
Yes, I've been really excited to see those go through because so many times people don't want to call the police on the person that they love. Like, who wants to see your spouse or your partner taken off in handcuffs, especially if maybe your partner is also undocumented, and that's going to result in their deportation, or maybe you're afraid of that happening. So super helpful to have this as a resource here in Oregon. I know that other places can do it too, but we've been mostly successful with that here in Oregon. Let's talk about child abuse in the context of domestic violence and especially U visas. I've seen it happen where I've been able to get a client a U visa approved through a crime that was committed against their child. And we know that this does happen in the domestic violence context, that sometimes as a way to maybe hurt someone, you hurt their children, right? As mothers, like, you want to hurt me, like hurt my daughter. That's probably going to hurt me more than if you hurt me directly. So let's talk about that. How does that work exactly? Does that child need to be also undocumented, or how does that work?
Yeah.
Let's go, Tami.
Sorry. Yeah. So the child, it doesn't matter if they're undocumented or a U.S. citizen. What matters is if the parent has been helpful in facilitating some kind of a police report or an investigation. And so if the child is a U.S. citizen, but the parent still reports, even if it's like to get DHS involvement, I don't know if we can edit this, but I don't know what it's called in Oregon. Is it CPS or
Yeah.
CPS?
DHS.
DHS. Okay. Okay. So even if it's to get DHS involved, there's some kind of an investigation. We can sometimes get the certification signed that way also. So it's mainly if the parent has been helpful or cooperative in the investigation. We can definitely use the crime that was committed against the child to apply for the U visa as well.
Yeah. I think some law enforcement gets confused about that. They're like, well, the child is a US citizen and doesn't need this protection. So sometimes it does require some explanation, some education. That's why it's important to have an attorney doing these things, because just because they're law enforcement, just because maybe they've received a training in a U visa process, doesn't mean that they fully understand everything. I've had to go and actually have sit down meetings with some local agencies to help them understand what it is that we're trying to do and how it fits within the U visa process. Which also, U visas, is this something that Trump can take away one day to the next, Alice?
No. This is also codified in the immigration code. We've got a specific section of the law in the immigration code for U visas that talks about the eligibility, and that cannot be taken away on a whim as well,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Yes, exactly. But one of the drawbacks about the U visa is that there's a specific amount that can be approved every year. And unfortunately, there are just many, many people who have applied, who've been survivors of different forms of violence. And so Tami, talk to us about, like, what are the steps? How long is it currently taking? What should people expect? Can you get a work permit? Can you travel? Like, all those things.
Yeah, so this is definitely the biggest downside to the U visa, is that there is a statutory cap on how many U visas immigration will grant annually. And so that number is 10,000. And that number is not very much, considering how many people are still waiting for their U visas. And so right now, I think we're seeing cases approved that were filed in like the spring of 2017. So that's a significant backlog of cases that are still waiting. Recently, because of how long it's taking for people to actually get their U visas, immigration came up with a new process called the bona fide determination process. And so basically what that means is they don't want you to have to be waiting 15 plus years to get your U visa. You will have to wait that long to get your U visa, but they have been granting these bona fide determinations within about 2 to 3 years. And these bona fide determinations basically protect you from deportation by giving you something called deferred action and a work permit. And the work permit is something that can be renewed while you're waiting to get your U visa. So it's kind of like this little Band-Aid that they're giving us in the meantime while you're waiting for your U visa.
Right. And protection from deportation right now is like gold. So anyone who is watching this, if you are worried about being undocumented, please make sure that you're reaching out to see, and you think that you might be eligible for a U visa, reach out. Even if you've talked to somebody before, reach out again and let us review your case for you. Can you travel with that work permit, or when can somebody with a U visa be able to travel? We get that question a lot. Alice, you want to answer that?
Yeah, unfortunately, you really can't travel if until it is granted, until you can get some other type of status where you could apply for like an advanced parole or something, which is usually when you're trying to get your green card. But you've got to get that U visa first. And so that is a big downside that, people really should understand, because it does mean you have to stay in the United States. If you leave the United States, you risk not being able to get back in, or you risk abandoning your application as well. So there's a lot of tricky factors to consider. Another reason why it's important to have, someone who's skilled in this area to guide you through these things, and we meet with people all the time that have to make choices for their family. Our job is not to tell you what you can and cannot do. What we are doing is we are giving you information so that you can assess the risks and make the best decision for your family. And sometimes people do have to leave the United States while their case is pending. And And that's unfortunate for the legal aspect, but that was the right decision for their family, and we respect that. So, again, our job is just to inform so that you can make the best decision for your family.
Yeah. What about, this brings up actually thinking of family that are in a home country. If someone is here and applies for the U visa, can they also then petition to bring family? Tami?
Yes, yeah. So, depending on how old the applicant is, if they're over 21, they can include their spouse and any children under the age of 21, unmarried children. If the primary applicant is under the age of 21, they can include a spouse if they happen to be married. They can also include unmarried siblings under the age of 18, and they can include their parents. And so it doesn't matter if these are family members inside the United States or outside, as long as they meet those age requirements, and are unmarried if they're children or siblings, they can still be included.
And that age requirement is at the time of filing, right? It doesn't matter if it's going to take 10, 15 years for this to be approved. Those people will still be eligible.
Yes, absolutely correct. So at the time of filing, your family members' ages are kind of like locked into place. So you don't have to worry about aging out.
Yeah, which is so important, because I think sometimes we think, oh, 10, 15 years, what's the point of even starting? I have to remind people, and remind myself also, that like those years are going to pass by whether you do something or not. And if you do it now, you're going to be that much further ahead, because this is a long game. And with everything with immigration is a long game. You have to be in it with patience and ready to wait it out, and knowing, I think it's the mindset of an immigrant, I believe, to make decisions today that will positively impact future generations and future your children, your children's children. So these are decisions that, yes, it's going to be a delay in actually receiving the benefit, but it's going to completely change your future and the future generations. So keeping that in mind is super important. Anything else that you guys want to add about U visa before we move on?
I think we covered it.
Okay, so just as a recap, some of the helpful things about the U visa is that you don't have to actually have been married. Actually, Alice, let's go back to VAWA real quick, because you're in Texas, and Texas has common law marriage. I get this question all the time. I'm in Oregon. Oregon does not have common law marriage. Tami, you're in Idaho. Do you guys have common law marriage there?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, but I loved this. I did live in Texas for a while, and I loved this about Texas. Explain to us what that means, Alice, in the context of VAWA with a common law marriage.
Yeah, so we've actually had success in these in common law marriages for VAWA as well. And because it is the law here in Texas, the states that do recognize common law marriage, each state has its own requirements. What I can only really speak to what Texas is. I know I think some states require like a minimum of 2 years living together, things like that. In Texas, we don't even have that. In Texas, you basically just have to live with someone for a minute. You have to live with someone for some certain period of time. And you have to have some type of an agreement that you're going to get married, or that you recognize each other as a husband and wife. And you have to what's called hold yourself out as husband and wife, meaning other people look at you and think of you guys as married. And so if you can prove that you meet those requirements, you can prove that that person is a spouse for purposes of VAWA. In Texas, we also have something called registration of an informal marriage, which is kind of like retroactive date of a marriage. So essentially, you could go to the county clerk, you and your spouse could go to a county clerk today and say, hey, We agreed that we were actually married 15 years ago, and you just pick a date and you write that date on your informal license, and they issue a license that says, okay, well, now the state of Texas recognizes that you were married as of this date 15 years ago. And now, obviously, you have to be eligible to be married. You can't be married to other people. You can't be related to within a certain degree. There are certain limitations, but Texas is unique when it comes to common law marriage and registration of informal marriage. And that is something to keep in mind. As immigration practitioners, whether we're, filing an application where we want to include a spouse, or whether it's based on VAWA, where, we're trying to show that the abuser meets that relationship. There are just different ways that we can do that.
Mm-hmm. And from what I remember too is even if you no longer live in Texas, if you lived in Texas together for that minute that you were considered married, then you're eligible. So I'm always asking, like, did you ever live in Texas?
That's a good question.
We should add that to our intake.
Yes, we should.
Well, let's move on. I want to briefly talk about special immigrant juvenile status. This is for in Oregon under the age of 21, other states also under the age of 21, but most states up to the age of 18 for kiddos that have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. This is for children that are here in the U.S. and it will eventually get them their green card. It's a lengthy process. It's a 3-step process. And it does require us also talking with the kiddos to find out what their home life was like. Because like I was saying earlier, many times these kids come from countries where it's very common to get beaten with a stick just because you didn't, take out the trash or whatever you were supposed to do that day. And so having a conversation about this is what life looks like here in the US. This is what happens if a parent treats their kid in the way that that you're describing that you've been treated. Would you consider the fact that you maybe were abused by your parents? And that can be a hard conversation to have, I think, because we love our parents and we don't want to think that they did something to us to hurt us. And most times I hear from the kids, well, yeah, I was kind of like a bad kid, so I got what I deserved. Well, nobody deserves to be beaten. And so, but it can be difficult for kids to write a statement. We have to write a statement saying what happened, what their parents did, what they went through in their childhood. And it can be hard for the kids to do that because they really believed that their parents were doing their best, and they probably were doing their best. Many people who abuse their children is because they were abused as children as well. And so we do what we know and until we know better, and then we do better. And it can also, the special immigrant juvenile status can also be based on abandonment or neglect. And those things can look, like regular life in some countries where they don't have access to medical care or dental care, or they don't have food regularly. And so these kiddos that are coming here, it's a completely different life here where they have access to all of those things. And they don't want to say, well, it was because my parents didn't love me. And because that's probably not even true. Their parents probably did love them, but for whatever reason, they weren't able to provide for them because of the economic status. And so that can become a basis for getting a green card that way. So I just wanted to bring that up just briefly in the context of this Domestic Violence Awareness Month of October, because so much of this is culturally based, right? Have you guys seen this in other ways, in other relationships, or where the person who's a survivor of domestic violence is even unaware that this qualifies as abuse? Give me some examples, Alice, of some of the things that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think we see that a lot. And just even in the context of physical abuse, which we in the United States think of as just very black and white. And in many cultures around the world, it is common and, in fact, expected to corporally punish your spouse, a husband to corporally punish his wife for infractions, whether they are cultural infractions, religious infractions, or just social. In the home, it's expected, and you're actually considered a bad husband if you don't correct your wife in that way. And so, we see it a lot actually, in a husband and wife relationship or in a spousal relationship, where women are like, well, he's supposed to do that. He's my husband. He's supposed to correct me. A lot of times they use the word correct me, is what I hear a lot is, well, he's supposed to correct me. It's like, okay, well, a correction does not necessarily mean a beating, or physical corporal punishment. And that is culturally different, I think, a lot. And so we just have to be mindful of that, and just say, look, I'm not being disparaging on your culture by saying this is what you do there. I'm just letting you know here in the United States, that is not acceptable. And we can explain that in such a way, that you may be eligible for benefits now that you are, getting rid of that relationship or stepping away, or even if you're just setting new boundaries in your relationship, like you mentioned, Abigail, where people can change. You don't have to leave the relationship, but yeah, we do see that a lot. And just briefly, another big one that I see a lot is people whose children abuse the parents. We have several cases right now where we have adult citizen children, United States citizen children, that are being abusive towards their parents. Whether it's, hey, you're undocumented and I'm here and you need me. And so you have to pay for my life and you have to put up with my mess. And, all of these things, we do see that a lot as well. And people are like, oh, well, he just needs discipline. My child is just having a bad day or whatever. And it's like, okay, but again, we come back to, what are the cumulative effects? Is this a one-time thing, or is this how your relationship looks? Is this something that your child does to manipulate you into doing things that you don't want to do for them? And so, there's just multiple contexts that we look at when we're trying to get into the details of someone's relationship and what's happened.
Yeah. Thank you for those examples. Tami, do you have any examples that stand out to you?
Yeah, so something that I hear over and over, in the context of like marital relationships or just romantic relationships is that well, it's okay that they were going through my phone. They're just, it's not jealousy. They just love me so much. They want to make sure that, that they know what I'm doing. And isn't that like what everybody does? And it's just kind of having that conversation, like, actually, no, that's a sign of control or isolation or, whatever it is. And so, yeah, that I've had that conversation a few times with clients, where they just don't really see that, like, well, isn't it normal that, doesn't your partner always want to know where you are at every second? And don't you have to call and check in with your partner too, and tell them where you are? And don't they track you on their phone? Like, don't they know where your location is at all times? And yeah, so just kind of having those conversations, like, well, in a healthy degree, maybe, but what you're telling me doesn't sound that healthy. And so let's talk more about this. And how does that make you feel? And just, yeah, kind of helping them come to the realization that maybe that's not a healthy aspect of their relationship that they thought was healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely there's there's like a line that gets crossed. You never know where that line is, where it goes into unhealthy. But I think definitely it's important to know, like, how does it make you feel and what is the person's perspective on it? Because it might be just like totally normal and not something that's bothering somebody. And we never want to like convince somebody that they are in a domestic violence situation that they're not in. Like it just might be a different dynamic. But it is important to have that conversation, to be able to open up and to have a discussion about it, because it might be might be something that's kind of deep, like deep inside. You're like, maybe this isn't right. Maybe this isn't healthy. And just like talking with a counselor, right? Because sometimes attorneys are called counselors because we have to like counsel and we have to pull things out. And so sometimes talking with somebody about this, it can validate that, like, yeah, this never really felt quite right to me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And other people are treated this way, but I don't really love it. And so I think that it's very, very helpful to have conversations. And that's why I love that we're having this discussion today too, is that so many of these topics don't get talked about. We don't talk about them with our family. We don't talk about them, you know, in our communities. And we need to talk. We need to know. We need to we need to be able to share with each other what's going on. And thankfully for immigrants, there's a lot of help, and there are a lot of ways that that these things can be used in a way to help bring even more freedom. Let's just talk about that actually for a minute. Why would an immigrant want to seek an immigration benefit? How would it be helpful to them as they're processing this? Like, okay, I'm in a situation that's no longer healthy. I'm in a situation that maybe I want to get out of. How would having going through an immigration process help them in that way, Tami?
Yeah, so I always start with like having a work permit. Just having a work permit gives somebody so many more options as far as maybe their living situation. If you have a work permit, you can maybe find a steady job and not be relying on this partner who is trying to control and use finances as a way to keep you in that relationship. And so I think, yeah, work permit, and then eventually, hopefully, a green card. Those are all just like steps towards stability and independence, and just not having to rely on anybody. Really, you can be in charge of your own destiny. And I think, like you said, having the freedom to make choices for yourself and your family instead of relying on somebody else to make those decisions.
Yeah, great points. Um, Also, let's just say that like one of the ways that many abusers um, use threaten, you know, to say like, I'm going to call ICE, I'm going to call immigration, you're going to get deported if you know, many people don't file a police report because they think that they've been told that they will then be, you know, deported because they're talking to the police. So a lot of these strong emotions around immigration can then, like, you can feel empowered. You can say, okay, I no longer have this fear, this thing that you threatened to do to me, you can't do it to me anymore. I have a work permit, I have security and stability. And so I think that more than anything, just that like you're saying, the ability to have freedom is gold. It's worth a lot. So thank you for sharing that. All right, our last topic that we're going to cover is something that that many people don't think about in the context of domestic violence, and I love that we're able to offer this service to our clients. We're going to talk about T visas. So Alice, please explain to us how trafficking and domestic violence can go together. What's the connection there?
There actually is a lot of overlap, and people don't always think about those things. But a T visa is for people who have been victims of human trafficking, which is also one of the crimes listed for a U visa. So there's some overlap there as well. But we have seen people be victims of trafficking by their partner. And we actually see that, unfortunately, a lot, where a partner can use someone unlawfully for purposes of sex or labor, and they are getting the benefit of it, but the immigrant is the victim of this crime. They're being taken advantage of, and they're actually being trafficked. And so when people come to us and tell their stories, all of us are asking kinds of questions so that we can screen for these things just naturally. But we do hear a lot of overlap, unfortunately, that people do not recognize as trafficking. But that is also codified in the law as a viable visa option for people who meet the qualifications. That's something, again, that Trump cannot take away. If you meet these qualifications. Tami mentioned for U visa, there's 10,000 allotted U visas per year that get used up really quickly. T visas have 5,000 allotted every year, but it's a harder burden to meet, and so we usually don't use all of those, and so there's not as long of a wait time for those as there are for U visas. But it is a higher burden. There are extra factors to prove. Law enforcement is not required to certify a T visa application, although they can, and it's helpful. It's not required. But there are different factors where a relationship, whether an abusive relationship or a manipulative relationship, can cross those lines to legally meeting the definition of trafficking.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really interesting to me, and I'm so glad that we are able to offer this, because, like you're saying, most people don't see it in that context, and because there are these visas available, and so especially given the fact that, like, you might be eligible for a U visa, like we were saying earlier, it might be a VAWA and a U and a T, and maybe even a special immigrant juvenile. Like, you might qualify for all four. And the benefit about talking with us is that we are going to ask you the questions to find out which one's going to be the best fit for you. If let's just say this, let's say if somebody qualified for all four of those, Alice, which one would you recommend if they had
Wow,
to
that's
choose one?
if that's really difficult. It's going to depend on the person. I mean, if they entered with a visa and it was based on their spouse that was abusing them, I would probably go the route of VAWA because I think that's a more direct route to a green card. But if it's someone who maybe did not enter with a visa, has other forms of inadmissibility, I'd probably go with the U. But the trafficking visa does have benefits in that it's a little bit faster, I think, in some regards. And so, I think that's one of the benefits of speaking to an attorney that regularly practices all of these things is we can really talk to our client because my job is to help them reach their goals. And their goal may be permanent residency in the United States, no matter what it takes or how long it takes to get there. Or their goal may be, you know what, I may not have long-term options, but I really want to be here to get a work permit to see my kids graduate high school. I just want to be able to ride this out a little bit longer and minimize my risk here in the United States. And so it's really about talking with the person and figuring out what their goals are rather than me telling them this is the best option for you. Sometimes we do direct them, hey, based on what your goals are, I'm thinking this is the best option, but ultimately they're the ones that are controlling the case.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's an important point to make. We can make recommendations, we can list the pros and the cons, and it really is up to the client to decide which cases they want to invest in. If money was no object, then we'd probably say, like, do all four, see which one
Yeah.
comes out fastest and the best for you. But definitely want to be able to make those recommendations and so that clients can make those decisions. I wanted to actually, as we were talking, I realized there's another form of relief that we weren't prepared to talk about today. So I'm just going to touch on it briefly, is that there are ways to get asylum here in the US if you have suffered domestic violence in your home country. So I'm not going to go into that too in depth, but there's a way to file for it with USCIS if you've been here less than a year, or if you are already in the process with the immigration court and you're in deportation process, you can file your asylum with the court. You can also file any of these applications while you're in process with the court. And some of the benefits of filing these applications is that sometimes you can close your case with the court sooner or later. And as a way to be able to stay here and to avoid deportation. And so all of these things are options that you would talk about with us. We would go over with you regarding your specific situation, because it's not a cookie cutter solution. Every case is different. Every case is, this is a good point to say, like, but so-and-so told me like they did XYZ. Why can't you do that for me? I think we hear that a lot as attorneys, and it really just depends on the person's situation and their circumstances and the law, and that will impact our recommendations. So as we're wrapping up here, is there anything that you feel like people need to be aware of, or that you wanted to say and you haven't had an opportunity to say yet today? We'll go with you, Tami, first, and then Alice, you can finish us up.
I think I would just encourage people to reach out to an attorney if you think that you may be in a situation where you have suffered domestic violence. Also, a lot of people, like under Trump 2.0, we've seen just an increase in reluctance to report crimes in general, because people are just afraid of what that means for them. And so what I would like to say is, just put the information out there. Police and domestic violence shelters, they don't generally ask about your immigration status in most cases. Undocumented people can get restraining orders and have access to emergency medical care without questions about your immigration status as well. And so just want to encourage people that those are still options, even though it seems a little bit scarier right now. Those still are options, and to definitely call the police if you feel like you are in a situation where your life is being threatened in any way.
Thank you. Really good points. Alice?
Absolutely. Tami and I are thinking along the same lines, and I'll just, Tami took that aspect of it. I'll just use the flip side of that coin, which is the negative side of people being reluctant to report crimes. This is a negative impact on our community in general. And that's something that we do when we are advocating for our clients with law enforcement is, look, one of the reasons that this U visa exists is to encourage non-citizens to report crimes and to assist in the prosecution of crimes, because we want to encourage people to get the criminals off of the streets, right? We want to decrease the crimes in our communities. And so, when we hear, negative talk from the administration or the general public about certain types of communities, we want to remind the general public and law enforcement in particular that encouraging people to report crimes is a benefit to everyone. It's a benefit to both the non-citizen, but to our community's citizens as well. And so that is something we always try to bring up and stress, is that there are reasons that the law is written the way that it is, and it's to protect our whole community, which includes people who are citizens and people who are non-citizens.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to also share that ways that we can support immigrants. If we ourselves are not immigrants, how can we support them? And one of the things I was just thinking right now as you were talking is by saying something. And I think it's uncomfortable when we see something that doesn't feel right. My immediate reaction is like, it's none of your business. Don't mind your business. Don't interfere. If you're seeing something, maybe I'll call the police, but not want to get in the middle of it. The ways that we can support immigrants, I think, is number one, sharing this video or sharing any information and resources so that information can get out there and people can feel supported and understand what their next steps are if they're in a situation like this. And then just being a good friend. You don't have to do it with strangers. Maybe you're not comfortable with strangers, but definitely if someone is a friend to you and you see something that is in their relationship, whether it's with their kids or with their spouse, with their parents, saying something, because it might be that one thing that you say that will trigger a thought in their mind that says, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't healthy. Maybe this isn't safe. Maybe this is not a good relationship. When we're in a relationship, we have our blinders on. We see with rose-colored glasses, like all of the things. Like, we need outside people to help speak into us and to help us really see a relationship for what it is. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Like, if you are an immigrant, please reach out. We would love to help you. If you are not an immigrant and you want to help others, please share this video. Please help spread the word for October Domestic Violence. I'm not going to be able to say it. October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And thank you, ladies, for being with me here today. What a wealth of knowledge both of you are. I'm so happy to know that that we are doing the work and serving the immigrants who need our help. So thank you so much for being here with me today, and I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.